Salutations Rangers, General Bradley 101 back at you, and today we have another discussion vid, and in this video we're going to be talking about powered armor. I mean, who doesn't love power armor? You know, big, giant, bulky mass of indestructible, whatever, it's great. And, you know, this kind of stems from the idea of the knight being the quintessential armored figure. And, you know, what's cooler than a knight? A sci-fi knight with a plasma gun. Which is pretty sweet. Now, when dealing with this, we're not going to talk about sci-fi, we're also going to talk about fantasy. Because there's something that we'll notice with any fantasy armor. And we'll get to that a little later. So, what is power armor? For those who don't know, powered armor is essentially in of itself armor that is powered by a fuel source, whatever that fuel source may be, and allows the wearer of the armor to have super speed, super strength, and increase durability. That's the general gist of it all. And every single science fiction franchise has a form or another of powered armor. You know, you have Fallout, which is literally just called power armor, and has like coined the term, I think. Like when you say power armor, I think generally people refer to Fallout. And then you also have StarCraft with the powered combat assault suit, which is basically, if you guys haven't played StarCraft, great game. The Terran Marine, that's what they wear. Yet the Mjolnir powered armor from Halo, Spartan armor, who doesn't love it. Star Wars as well has its own powered armor. And the Republic had mech troopers, and then there's the Dark Trooper program for the Empire, but I think with Mandalorian they may have retconned it. See, that the idea was that with Dark Trooper armor, first and second generation Dark Troopers were powered armor, but the third generation was robot android specific. So I think canonly they went with the third generation as the official Dark Trooper. Not too sure about that, but that seems to be the case. And then we have Warhammer 40k, Space Marine, they wear powered armor. You know, there are different levels of powered armor. And yeah, power armor is everywhere. Everything. Starship Troopers as well has powered armor, but you wouldn't know that from the movie, but the original book and a lot of original media has them in powered armor. And we get to see the different types of powered armor here. You know, you have on the wilder side, you have the Space Marine and Mjolnir powered armor, where, like, you know, it's several thousand pounds, or several hundred pounds, and you need people it's not capable to be used by a normal human. Spartans are genetically modified, Space Marines are genetically modified. So it's very much a specialist weapon of how do we make this weapon more dangerous. You know, you have a Space Marine and you have Spartan genetically augmented super soldiers. How do you make them even more deadlier? Let's give them power armor that only they can utilize. And that is also a common trend. And then you have the other type of power armor, which is the Fallout power armor and Starship Troopers and the StarCraft. In which case, they're normal guys using it, but in the case of the Starship Troopers, they're actually a pseudo-elite force with lots and lots of heavy-duty training. And we see over here that designs vary wildly. You know, you have Halo armor, which is appearance-wise, mind you, relatively realistic. It just looks like a little bit bigger of a guy. You know, again, I think the idea of powered armor is somewhat realistic, but I haven't seen anything implemented where I get to, yeah, that's kind of realistic. The only thing I can think of is the adaptation of power armor, or the interpretation rather, in the Starship Trooper animated movies. That seems to be, generally speaking, pretty realistic. Size, you know, battery life, what it offers you. Although, you know, it does fall into the question of, like, how protective is it when, you know, this is just a common media trope where, like, armor is treated as paper. So, you know, it is what it is. But the real meat and potatoes of what I want to get into is that in sci-fi, there's always a powered armor. Always. Yeah. There's always powered armor, you always have powered armor soldiers, powered armor things, and what they can do depends. And in some cases, it's very, very rare, like in 40k and Fallout, but in some cases, like Star Wars and StarCraft, StarCraft and Starship Troopers are the true most of this. Their standard combat infantry is fully armed with this as base. Like, the basic troopers are armed in powered armor. I think this speaks a lot because both StarCraft and Starship Troopers, the main antagonists are these otherworldly insectoid cosmic horrors. So I think it's the idea of, hey, these things aren't really human, so we need something that isn't traditionally human to fight them. So for example, standard infantryman with an M4 and Kevlar isn't going to do much against, a Bio-Titan that wants to come and meet you. And then speaking of Bio-Titans, what about the God? People ask. Well, no one cares about the God in 40k. Not even the God cares about the God, unless you're like Cadians. So now there's that. But the main thing that I want to get into is fantasy. Because while in sci-fi, power armor is everywhere, fantasy, power armor is noticeably lacking. Think about it. Think about some big fantasy names. Warhammer fantasy, Lord of the Rings, for example, Harry Potter. I know Harry Potter just isn't war-based, but it is a very popular fantasy thing. And while there are enchanted armor in that, or magical armor, they're very much one-off items. Ultra specialized, ultra rare. D&D, for example, magical armor, it does things, gives you boosts here and there, but it's not like we consider power armor in sci-fi to power armor in fantasy. Now, the only time that I've ever come across something that's close to fantasy-based power armor is Warhammer Age of Sigmar, the Stormcast Eternal, Sigmarines. Now, love or hate Age of Sigmar, the Sigmarines look bloody cool. Gotta admit that. Now, these chaps are reforged, and they are forged by Sigmar and magically augmented to be semi-immortal. And I say semi-immortal because when they die, they do lose a little bit of their personality and memories, so take it from that point. And they are armed with armor known as Sigmarite armor, which is said to be forged out of Sigmarite, which is the leftover stuff of the old world, used by Sigmar, and said to increase their durability and their strength. That's magical armor. And the Sigmarines are basically the equivalent of Space Marines to Age of Sigmar. They are elite. They are the elite fighting force. Not as elite as, say, a King's Guard or something, but they're fairly elite, And I think it's really interesting that in fantasy, that's really the only example I can think of a powered armor worn by semi-elite, well, not semi-elite, but semi-apparent soldiers. They're not the basic foot troopers, but you do see them in almost every battle. And that's really interesting to me, and I wonder why. Why is it that in sci-fi, power armor is a must, but in fantasy, it's kind of impossible? Because when you think about it, what separates the idea of power armor from fantasy and sci-fi? Well, in sci-fi, it's the idea of eventually we'll get there. The militaries around the world now are looking into exosuits to help soldiers distribute weight and increase them. And generally speaking, we do have the tech to make something like that. The question is, how good would it be? That's the main question, but it is very much plausible that we could make that. And I think it's really interesting how the reason why, and this is my own personal theory, I think why power armor is absent from fantasy so much is because it's automatically assumed that as we progress more and more, eventually we will get powered armor. Powered armor will be a reality, and it is very much possible for it to be a reality. You know? Same thing like mech armor. We just assume that we're going to do it because it is useful and it has utilities. And with that, it's really interesting how there's this kind of bias in that we believe that eventually we will get there no matter what, but in fantasy, it's like that idea seems to be lost on people. And I find it really odd. Because you could go the elite route in fantasy and be like, this is special armor blessed by the gods or magically produced only for the elite of the elite. You could do that, like I said, with the Sigmarines, Stormcast Eternals. Or, this is my own unique idea that I had. Have your armor crafted... Okay, so I need to explain this before. So basically when you do magic, there are two magical systems. There is traditional magic, caused by spells and incantations and what have you, and there is runic magic. Runic magic, basically, it's the idea of the power is derived from forging specific symbols and signs into arms and armor and weapons and whatnot. It's very popular in Norse and Celtic mythologies, runes as well. Very, very popular. So, basically, my idea was, you take a standard infantry force, standard suit of armor, for an infantryman, and, we'll be generous here. We'll say he's fairly well armored. He has gambeson and icatong cloth armor, basically, underneath, and then he has a chain shirt, chainmail hallwork, and we'll say he has a brigandine, which is a type of plate armor, a cuirass. We'll say he also has a pair of padded trousers, or gambeson trousers, as well, which basically pad up to the thighs and whatnot. They did exist, weren't really as popular, because usually some gambesons just covered all the way down to the knee, but they did exist. Give him some greaves, as well as some nice sturdy combat boots, pauldrons and gauntlets, and a nice helmet with a shield, and make sure the armor has a gorget and an aventail. Fairly solid dude, I wouldn't want to fight him. I don't think you guys would want to fight him. But against a troll, or let's say a Dark Lord or some lizard person or whatever have you that's way better than humans, because humans are always the weakest thing in fantasy. Except for The Witcher, I think, which is actually interesting in where humanity is actually the dominant race there, which is really interesting. Anywho, instead of magicking up, just get a low-level mage to carve some runes into the armor. Make the armor, you can make the chest plate, durability, rune of resistance, rune of defense. And then basically what you could have is the gauntlets be strength, or the helmet be vision and senses and whatnot. You could craft this so that when you put on this thing, it amplifies your strength as is. Now, there's two ways you go about this. You could put as much runes to make them as strong or stronger, but I think a great way to do it was to have your runes. Let's take orcs, for example. Good old orcs. Love orcs. Orcs are generally bigger and stronger than humans. Take Warcraft orcs, for example. They're they're about twice the size, and in the movie version, they generally wipe the floor with them. If that armor, the footman armor, was enchanted so that a human could take a hit from an orc, where normally if an orc hits you with one of their axes on your shield will get cracked, your bones will get cracked probably, but if that armor is enchanted so where he can withstand that hit, and he could still pose a threat to the orc, not as strong as the orc, not as dangerous as the orc, but he doesn't get wiped by the orc. He's able to hold his own. And I think that that is something really missing. That is a really good way to even out the playing field against monstrous races that are severely stronger and more warlike than us. Have our own infantry in a quote-unquote powered armor with runic magic. And using that, they can withhold and withstand. For example, you take our classic guy. Yeah, he has a spear and a shield. Yeah, long spear and a relatively solid shield, covers from neck to thigh or neck to knee. If you put him in a phalanx, yeah, or a type of formation like that, with his buddies, if orcs charge them, normally they just wipe them, or if trolls charge them, they just wipe them with the floor. But if you make it so that armor allows them to hold, you can then leverage what humanity has. Because humanity, unless they're fighting undead, has numbers most times out of 10. The biggest impact of orcs or trolls or these heavy-duty shock units is the ability to break lines. If you play Total War Warhammer, you know that trolls into like Empire Spearmen just get they absolutely walloped. But if you can make it so that your infantry can hold them, then have your archers rain hell upon them. Have your cavalry charge them from the flank. You know, you could have your handgunners blast them. It's a really unique way, I think, and a very like explored way of leveling the playing field. Because in Warcraft, so much war everywhere. In Warcraft, the way that they level humanity's lack of strength is with technology. In the movie, great example, they use firearms. You know, like handheld pistols. And that's a great way to hold off the orcs. Because while the orcs do have brute strength, you know, bullets are the ultimate equalizer. 45 ACP, bang, dead. Now, just imagine if they had that with the ability to hold them at bay. I think what really shows this is the dwarves in Warhammer Fantasy. So they have something called Ironbreakers. Now, Ironbreakers are ultra heavy armored infantry. They are armed with something called Gromrel, which is basically space steel, meteor steel. It is ultra tough, ultra durable, and these guys basically are meant to fight in the tunnels or underground in tight phalanxes. And orcs and anything don't, like, these dwarves themselves are stronger and more durable than humans, and giving them space armor essentially makes them bastions. Bastions of bastions. So, that is really interesting, but then again, they also combine the Iron Breakers with another form known as Iron Drakes. Now, these Iron Drakes are clad in the same armor, except, let me see if you can guess what Iron Drakes do. They have flamethrowers. So, the dwarves have proven very, very effective underground, because when you have a phalanx of, you know, dwarves in heavy armor with flamethrowers behind them, pretty durable. Now, imagine if that armor was powered by runes. I just feel like power armor shouldn't be something solely bound to sci-fi. You know, give fantasy some power armor. And you know, you could make it different. Like, let's say one power armor has runes of invisibility, another power armor has runes of strength, another one runes of durability. Let's say that you can make a magic system where you can only imprint runes on certain types of metal or something. Or a magic system in which case you need metal forged from magic or in the same place that forged the runes. You guys can play around with this. And I urge you, if you guys are a writer or you guys are listening to this and you're doing something with fantasy, make some fantasy power armor. And if you guys know of any like fantasy universe that has proper fantasy power armor in any case, whether it be basic infantry or the elite version, please let me know in the comments below. I'd love to get into it. Thank you guys oh so very much for watching, and I will catch y'all next time. Dismiss, Rangers. Okay, so like, if you unironically hate the Sigmarines, you are fucking cringe.